Everybody, thank you so much for joining this particular iteration of the Story Together podcast with our good friends Harley Stroh and John Four, the man, myth, the legend himself, the Jedi archivist, as I refer to him against his wishes. So I appreciate you gentlemen joining. How you doing on this fine Saturday afternoon?
It's a beautiful day, sir. Glad to be alive.
Yes.
Ain't that the truth? So
chatting it.
I feel like I have entered into some Gen X tabletop royalty conversation that, as a millennial, I feel slightly underqualified to be in, but I will do my best to keep up with you guys. And in that vein, Harley, wonderful to get to meet you, obviously. Had a wonderful conversation with John a few months ago, and, I'm just super grateful for this intro. I guess where I'd love to get started is obviously, your history with Goodman, DCC. I'd really love, my first question is around when you're designing something like Sailors on the Starless Sea, right? Which I think is, if you don't mind me saying, probably on the Mount Rushmore of DCC. If you don't mind, just call a spade, right?
Let's keep on the Borderlands for DCC.
Yeah.
I've run that 3 times and played it 5 times. It's amazing.
Oh, that's dope. Yeah.
That's crazy, dude.
When I was reading some of your profiles previously, Harley, you talked about when you get inspiration. I usually like to start with inspiration because a lot of us GMs, we got to find it one way or another. You talk about, I think you said you look at paintings or you look at some of your illustrator's art. I mean, obviously his history is ridiculously good. Where did you learn how to find and ultimately use that illustration for your creative output?
That's a really cool question. The man who does, most of the covers that everyone's seen is Doug Kovacs. He's our chief artist, for doing covers and doing a lot of the interior illos. And cool anecdote. He was my very first DCC. Was the first time he illustrated something for Goodman. This is DCC 17, a bajillion years ago, like 2004. But before there was DCC RPG proper. So my mother's an artist, and so I just grew up, always being around, somebody's painting something or drawing something. Or illustrating something. And so that's just been a part of my biography, as a child. And, I think, every judge, every GM is going to find inspiration from something else. But for whatever reason, for me, it's visual. So, you see a beautiful, like, Parkinson painting, like, the Temple of Elemental Evil, right? And you want to write some cool adventure to go with that dark, he has monoliths, and creatures, looming from the background. It's like, it just begs you to make something cool enough, to go with that.
Right.
And working with Doug, it's the same way, he'll do a brilliant painting. You just want the writing to live up to it. But how about you, John? Like, where do you go for inspiration? Because exactly. Right. Has anything ever lived up to that painting? I don't know that adventure is still not out there. Like, I love Temple of Elemental Evil, but it's not as good as that Parkinson painting.
Yeah, the lightning.
Oh my God, it's brilliant. And if you look right down at the door, there's like this hooded figure right at the back, and it's like, oh man, like that painting hasn't been written to yet. Like, Parkinson made it for Temple of Elemental Evil, but we haven't written an adventure good enough for that painting yet.
Yeah,
that is so cool.
For sure.
Yeah, yes, but that's so obviously I'm really passionate about the art. I love it, and it's what excites me. And for every writer out there, the coolest moment is when you've written your adventure, and you get it back and you see like whatever cover art somebody created for it, like
it materializes.
It's the best.
Visual. Yeah.
But John, all right, I'm rambling. Where do you go for inspiration?
Well, I go to the Temple of Elemental Evil. This will be the 10th time I've run this adventure.
That's so baller.
Stop talking trash about your favorite adventure. I apologize.
No, it's great. I've turned it into a sandbox. So the players have this Temple of Elemental Evil. The High Priest wants to become Pope for the barony. And so it's there in the background. If they want to dungeon crawl, they can. But otherwise, it's just an agent or a catalyst in the campaign.
Oh, that's really cool. How far do your players typically, do they go into the dungeon proper, or like, how does that work out?
Yeah, this time it's with a new combination of players. So I've GM'd these 5 people in previous campaigns, but never themselves together as a group. And I've also converted it to the Wine RPG. And so they they have one mission to deliver a letter to the high priest of the temple for an innocuous reason, and so they can look at the temple finally. But they have not yet had really an opportunity or a hook or a call to action to dungeon crawl. Right now, they know they don't like the high priest being evil, and have just learned that the high priest has great ambitions of becoming pope of the major religion in the world.
Sweet.
And so they've gone through a few other adventures. So we just went through the Moat House, actually, which is the sort of level 1, T1 Hamlet version. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so we had fun there, but they seem to be more...
Did anyone get eaten by a frog?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a classic moment, right? The giant frog has to eat somebody.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And anyway, so they're looking at it from a sandbox perspective right now. The Rogue wants to set up a trading company of antiquities, and therefore the relics that they find that aren't Vorpal swords, but more like pottery from this sibling. He wants to have that business, and they all have their own goals. So far, we have not gone into Temple Dungeon proper. My intention is not to go door to door with that. They if they want to do that, that's fine. But it's more like missions. So it's a large, sprawling mega dungeon. So on the 4th level, something's happening. You should go down to the 4th level and deal with it. And they go in, they deal with that, and then leave and go back to home base. That's the kind of campaign, if they want to delve into the temple, I'll lean into. But if they want to just go door to door, we'll see how it happens. Yeah, there's a lot of NPCs in this adventure that can make lives interesting if they choose that approach.
So is it set in Greyhawk for your campaign, or?
It's a homebrew world called Duskfall. And it's the evil is winning. It's sort of like, do you remember that setting? Midnight.
Yeah,
setting.
Midnight. Yep.
Yeah, it's riffing off of that. And Birthright, where monsters are in control of the realms. So there's a human-controlled realm surrounded by monsters in a post-Empire, post-apocalyptic world. I don't know if that's a good elevator pitch, but that's what's happening in it.
It was for me.
That's awesome.
So for creativity, I think I have an opposite answer to you, Harley. I'm left-brained, and so I have methods to break ideas out of my brain like they're trapped in a jail. So, for example, I'll use I think it's Ray Bradbury. I learned this from in his book, The What If Tool. So you just ask what if, and you could just go around like I'm playing with this toy. What if this toy was sentient, or what if it was 30,000 times larger, or what if it was made out of diamond? I don't know, but you just ask what if or why 5 times, et cetera, et cetera. So I think maybe it's like deconstructionist as opposed to looking at a compiled vision and then looking at the details and kind of getting the big picture and the small details and extracting those for inspiration. I kind of go from the bottom up, like what are all my Lego pieces, and then how can I build them into something more? So kind of an opposite approach, maybe. So
how do you manage to maintain the creativity? So your newsletter consistently comes out with amazing, useful tools for judges, and it's not just fluff. I've been DMing since I was 8, and I can still open those newsletters and be like, damn, that's a great idea. Are you planned out 6 months in advance? How do you manage to consistently deliver such quality material?
Thanks. I work backwards from outcomes. So what am I trying to accomplish, or what do I hope a game master will accomplish? And then what are the problems that could prevent that outcome? And then how do I write tips or solutions or ideas to help them overcome those problems? That would be a general format. But the reason why we have the best game in the world is it's almost like, okay, why don't you go ahead and create Wikipedia? Create your own homebrew setting, right? Wikipedia is endless ideas. You can look at history and technology and culture and other things, right? So RPGs are just a million real world subjects put into gameplay. So I don't see there's any way I could ever run out of ideas. Although, I do have down and up periods where I've got writer's block and I don't have writer's block. But in general, I don't think we could ever run out of ideas and stories to tell.
That's awesome. So it seems like, Harley, you have very organic a very fluid, a very artist process, whereas you have a very intellectual process, John. But either way, you're coming to the table both with a love and a passion for the subject that you're able to convey for your players over a very long period of success. I think that's really cool. So I run an organization called Story Together, as the name implies. We're playing stories together. And really our mission is to get as many brand new players into our art form and activity as possible, which I think is something that literally anyone who's played this realizes is a good mission, because our joy, our spirits, the bonds that we've sort of forged over time, a lot of it's come through this activity. In a deeply digital age, this is as wonderful and organic activity as possible. So one question I always have to ask, I collect, no, I'm collecting tips too, John, is where you guys got started. And John, we talked about where you got started and you got gifted those books. Harley, when I read your profile, I actually think you were one of the few beneficiaries of the Satanic Panic.
It's so true.
It's such a rare thing. Can you talk about that a little bit? Where you got started, where you found that passion initially?
It was so awesome. So so when I was 8, we had a babysitter come to the house. My parents were out for the night. He ran us into Keep on the Borderlands.
Yeah.
And I died. There's the Cobalt Caves. It's the very lowest one. You walk into it. There's a pit. 15 feet in. My elf walked in, died, and I was hooked. I was like this whatever we just did was amazing.
Yep.
What is this thing? And then but Satanic Panic, right? And so his parents made him get rid of all of his Dungeons and Dragons stuff. And I remember meeting in the lot behind his house. It was just like empty, dusty weeds up everywhere. And he handed me the basic D&D box, the mold base set, and it felt so momentous. It was so important. Like here was this forbidden tome of evil that his church had ruled against it. I was being handed like the Necronomicon, right? I was like, oh, this is mine now. Can I even tell my parents about this? I don't even know. And I hid it underneath my bed, and I've been madly in love with gaming ever since. But if he hadn't run that game for us, and if his parents hadn't gone off the deep end and made him get rid of all his gaming materials, I don't know what I'd be doing with my life right now. But that's how I came into gaming. And that was the age of 8, and have been loving what we get to benefit from ever since.
I just envision like 8-year-old Harley, and the babysitter, he's got his hand around your shoulder. Harley, I must pass this along to you, my friend. Only you can take it forward from here. And you're like, oh my God, I've been trusted with the secrets.
It felt so important in a way that wouldn't have if it had been a different situation, where if it was a birthday party, maybe you get this toy that you play with for half a day. But it felt so momentous to me as a young child. I know that sort of earnestness is still lives within me as we come to these games and stories that we love to play.
That's so cool. And I think you actually have a very similar history to John. Once that sort of inception point, I think that you ran games for your family, like I think you said your little brother, parents, friends in college. I mean, that's very similar to John.
Well, so John, what's your story? Recap that for us.
In a nutshell, I played a human cleric in the Keep of the Borderlands, and died at the tentacles of a carrion crawler.
Oh,
and that goes. So 2 dead characters, 2 lifelong enthusiasts. So maybe that's the secret: kill every character.
Kill them in the beginning.
Right. DCC is so successful. You just have the characters dying. Yeah. No, I mean, John, I'm sure your biography is similar, but all through high school, I ran for my brother and his friends. In college, I ran, Cyberpunk and L5R, and it wasn't. So then I followed the woman that would eventually become my wife. I followed her out to Keene, New Hampshire, and there's over by the railroad tracks. There's a hobby shop there, and I was thumbing through the stacks. I hadn't had a gaming group, now for about a year and a half since I'd left Colorado. And I'm thumbing through the stacks, and I pull out, this Dungeon Crawl Classics thing, and I open it up. And John, I don't know if you saw DCCs back in the day, but they used to use the blue lined maps. Like it was that same style as Keep on the Borderlands. And I knew that, like, oh my God, like these exist again. Like immediately wanted to to try to write something for that. And so that was my first submission. I sent off to Joseph, and that was Legacy of the Savage Kings. That was DCC 17, and I've had the good privilege of being with Goodman Games ever since.
That is really cool. So you I think you obviously had courage to do that. I feel like as a creative, when you put your work out there to be judged by the business side of creative works, which is exactly what you did, Harley. I feel like you're now at this point, you've followed your now wife, Takeen. You've gone through, as any young man does, a lot of ups and downs to get that point. You found something as a child that you were passionate about, right? You carried that with you the whole time. So one question that another question I always have to ask, and John had some great answers, is what were some of the moments that you would recall from games that you played that were in some ways like the core memories for you of your tabletop experiences with the people that were close to you that helped ferry along that passion throughout those ups and downs? What were some of those moments like?
I've run a lot of games.
I know.
I think there's those golden shiny moments. It might be at a con, it might be at something that you're running more long term.
Yeah.
But somebody rolls a die. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yes. Okay. So somebody rolls a die, they get a 20. The whole table stands up and cheers. They there's this roar of excitement. And if you're running a game at a con, like Gen Con or something, like you feel so proud of that moment, right? Because like there's 20 tables around you, and you're the ones that are standing up. Raw, the players are just like over the moon. I was running a game for my little brother and 3 of our friends, and it was City of Greyhawk, Sea of Silt. They had found the lair of this blue dragon. They went inside. The blue dragon wipes the entire party, save one paladin, with the bolt of lightning. And the paladin, being played by my little brother, we're rolling all the dice out in the open. He has 1 hit point left. And like, dude, you're like, the party's done. Like, this is over. And my little brother, playing this paladin, he holds up, this ring of wishes. I'm like, all right, what are you going to do? And he's like, all right, I'm going to wish us back in time, an hour. And I'm like, okay, well, we're going to roll for initiative. Like the blue dragon got surprised. Now let's roll for initiative. And, and we're all huddled over the dice. And my little brother beat me on initiative. He wishes everybody back in time. And it's just these moments that they live with us as gamers. It's
100%.
It's a shared imagination, but it's probably on a lot of levels. It'd be cool to see like the brain science, but is it any less real than, if I were to go out and climb Mount Sopris? Well, on some level, there's the whole body integration that you're physically going through this thing, but it would be fascinating to put on one of those skull caps, pack the different places of the brain. What's going on in a gamer's brain when that happens? Or like, oh my God, you kill it. You don't kill a character. A character dies and that kid is sobbing.
Yeah.
Oh my God, I'm a horrible human being. Like, is that, I mean, that grief is different, but is it different in quality, or is it just different in amount? Is it, to lose a character, that's obviously far worse than like losing your dog dying. But is the quality different, or just, I don't know. Cause like these stories do live with us. To the point where, you guys go to a con and somebody wants to tell you about his 13th level ranger, and you're crawling out of your skin. But at the same time, it means so much to that gamer. Like these are, I mean, and story together. Like that's what you guys are doing. You're like enabling people to have these shared experiences, which are, just because they're imaginary, they're no less real for the people like going through them.
Yeah, I love that point so much. It cuts to the core of, I think, the ethos of a lot of us who've stuck in this industry, through ups and downs that we experience. And I think for me, there's a lot of different ways, I think, to slice it. But think about it like this. There are a handful of things that are deeply and intrinsically human. Food, dance, art, right? Things like that. Shared oral traditions. But story, to me, is an intrinsically human thing. Experiencing stories, traditionally today, that's what film and television, now video games. In my opinion, I think John and I had a wonderful discussion about this. I think we're still in the silent movie era of tabletop compared to where it's going and how it's going to expand as a field because of what you just said, Harley. if I have bought into a story and I'm a character in that story and it's a living, breathing organism with people that matter to me, you are doubly compounding your connection to it by virtue of the player and character connection. I think that's absolutely vital for us to continue to reinforce for potential new players. Is you don't have to be like some Second City improv comedian or a Shakespearean actor. And technically, you actually don't even have to play a role. You can just be yourself, right?
Yeah.
Despite the title. And you actually don't, you can interact with neither Dungeons nor Dragons if that's
Right.
your jam. Like I love historical fiction the best, if I'm being perfectly honest. But regardless, I think for a lot of us whose lives have been impacted in a very positive way, that fact about that connection, that positivity is what carries me forward. I think a lot of us in this industry, I think you just put it like really beautifully, Harley. I think, I completely agree with you. I think John does as well. John's definitely, and he's collecting all of this. Think about it. I'm like kind of envious. He's like literally sucking in all of these best practices to make that better. I think that's just one of the coolest things. That's why I love you, John.
Well, it's interesting for, all the grief and loss that COVID brought us. Being able to vault into this period of time where we can, my God, we're meeting online right now, but we can like game online. I could be running a game for John this evening. I mean, that's ridiculous. And pre-COVID, I would put my thumb. Well, I'm going to roll real dice. I'm not going to click on roll 20, please. But now it's like, my God, what a gift! You know that we're able to and it was during COVID. Like, so I was running a library game. And COVID shut everything down, and I was still able to get together with those sixth graders, and we ran games all through COVID. It culminated. It was so invested on our digital platform that we completed it after the fact. We could have gotten together, but we completed it online just because of the assets we had there.
No, absolutely. I think that actually is a really great segue to something that I think John really cares about, and I also read in your profile. And we talked about this right before we started filming, is I think a light bulb moment for you, Harley, when you were running games for sixth graders. And I think you were doing Starless Sea. And typically, there's when you've done a module many times, you know which paths typically get tread, call a spade. And when this sixth grader did I'll let you say the story, the one syllable solution. I mean, to me, what we're doing right now is planting and cultivating an art form for the next generation to take the baton in the most holistic, positive way that we can. Yeah. I'd love to hear from both of you about some tips, things that you're getting, John, or different approaches to what we might consider quote unquote traditional tabletop. I actually think it's more accurate to say Gen X and millennial tabletop, because you can see the evolution in choices of like much higher emphasis on role playing for millennials and Gen Z, like much, much higher. Whereas you guys, it's like you took the baton from the wargaming roots, and now you have the sixth grade genius doing verbal Morse code in the ocean. I mean, like that's the stuff that's going to take this beyond the silent movie era. So Harley, for the people who have no idea what I'm talking about, because that is blabbed, could you just share that story? And then John, I'd love to hear your perspective on how the younger generation is approaching tips and evolving their games.
Sure. I'll try to make it succinct. And so the penultimate encounter in Starless Sea, the characters are crossing this wine dark underworld ocean to a ziggurat that's in the very center of this cave. So this and so they're on this dragon boat going to the ziggurat in the very center of the sea, and this 1,000 tentacles come up out of the water, right? And it's usually an opportunity for PCs and players to figure out, okay, how are we going to appease this thing? Well, Harley gave us incense, 10 minutes ago, so that probably has a purpose, or we stole these robes from earlier. But I'm playing with these sixth graders, Max, and so they managed to get to the ziggurat, and the ziggurat is filled with scores of beastmen, and Max is like, I want to talk to the Leviathan. I want to, I'm like, Max, you can't talk to Leviathan. Like, no. And he looks at his character sheet, which for DCC, everyone has an occupation. Who were they before they became, this adventure? It says, I'm a fisherman. I I learned the Song of the Sea. I'm like, all right, Max, but like, come on, like, what are you going to do? And like, the Leviathans underwater. I'm going to stick my head underwater. I'm like, Max, you're going to get attacked.
You're going to get eaten.
All of these things, right? It's going to rip you limb from limb, Max. And I love your character, and I don't want to see this happen. He's like, no, I'm doing it. I stick my head underwater. I'm like, okay, well, you're going to get attacked by 5. And so I roll 5 attacks on the Leviathan. They all miss. And I'm like, okay, Max, well, you're underwater. You're trying to blah, 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 speak to this thing, using only single syllable words, Max, and I want you to, go off, create, tell me what you're going to speak to the Leviathan. And so, Max goes away for 5 minutes. He comes back, and he has this wrinkled sheet of paper. I still have the piece of paper where he's written, big green thing, we fed you, you help us, or something along those lines. And my mind just like exploded, right? Like he has lived into this so strongly and created the solution that, I've run Sailors scores of times, with people that have been gaming, for as long as I have. And none of them had come up with a solution nearly as ingenious as this 12-year-old boy. And so, he convinces the Leviathan to come to their aid. The Leviathan starts ripping beastmen off the ziggurat and throwing them left and right. But if there was one gift I could give to my generation of gamers, it would be that, yes, we're all grognards, we're all accomplished, gamers, we know how to do it right. No, step out of that, run a game for a bunch of, 8, 6th graders or 4th graders or 5th graders, whatever. And like, they will blow your mind as to what's possible with role-playing games. Like, they haven't been acculturated to think of RPGs the way that, John and I grew up. Like, well, you did this and then you did this. And by the time you made it to 3rd level, well, then you could go on a wilderness adventure. And by the time you made it to 9th level, well, then you got to keep. Where these guys, as their kids, their imaginations are just wide open. They don't know what role-playing games are. They're just playing something brand new to them. They get to behave like adults. And it's like such a gift. So every grognard out there listening to your podcast needs to go run a game for their nephews and nieces right now.
And before we get to John's perspective on that, I just want to commend you, Harley, for not neutering his creativity. Right? You could have said no. Like, you could have been like, you're literally going to die automatically. But instead, what you chose to do in that moment is nurture his creativity. I think that's the real takeaway for me. Not to say that this boy had unlimited, because he didn't have boundaries put on him. Like a lot of, like when you play D&D
sure,
and you're like calculating Thaco fighting a mind flame, it's like you're in a little bit of a box. This kid's box hadn't started to fully form. And I think where you ought to be commended, and people of your generation, even mine, really need to take as a takeaway, is that you didn't neuter it. You supported it. You gave the baton back. You gave him a chance, right? I think that is really important. So I just wanted to say that before. John, I'm sure you've encountered things like this, and I'd love to hear them, but I think that just needed to be said. It's
the moments where the players surprise us that are so much fun, right? And I think that, if a judge could live into if we could pretend the world is real, and kind of like trace those cascading series of consequences, we don't have to default to the rules to say like, no, you can't do that. You'd be like, well, if you tried to do that, what might happen? But anyways, I've spoken too much. John, No,
that's great. I have not run for 6th graders, but I do love the idea that they are not yet bound by the tropes and the traditions and the repeat type of things. So by GMing people who are seeing things for the first time, you too see things brand new again. And I love that dynamic. Amazing. I would go the opposite way. So we're talking generations, so super, aggregated. Like every individual is going to have their own thing going on. But in general, one thing I've noticed is that they are more actually rules bound and more permission based. So
wait, could you lead into that? Help me understand.
Yeah, so like I get emails, and when they share their ages with me, which once in a while they do, I can benchmark that, and they're like, well, can I play the game this way? Like, for example, I'll get an email about, hey, you mentioned in your email about sandboxes, but, am I allowed to do that? Or is there, can I make a rule that does this? Or even the basics of how to make a ruling versus a rule. they're saying, well, can I do this? Can I do that? And they're looking for permission and or looking for the constraints that I think have defined their lives that did not define Gen X. So Gen X, well, I don't know about you. Again, it's super generalized. But I was kicked out of the house and told to come back at dinner time. But you don't have that dynamic today, I don't believe, with young people. They're given the rules and don't do this, and they're very protected. And therefore, I think they kind of absorb the idea that they have to get permission to do things, and they don't have to, and they can't think out of the box. Now, again, super generalized, but and RPGs is a magnificent solution, which your story illustrates.
Yeah. Well, but Ian, so you're younger than the two of us. What's been your experience with like the relationship with rules for RPGs?
I think it really depends on the age. So I'm 37, so I'm core millennial, I guess. For us, I think about it like this. The corpus of stories that you experience outside of role-playing games ultimately forges sources of inspiration. So for example, you guys, I mean, you had Star Wars, right? You had all of these start to come out, Indiana Jones, like that was probably your core influence. I had everything that you had, but then I had everything in the 90s. Like I had TNG. Not that you didn't. I'm just saying, like, when I was growing up, I played Baldur's Gate 2 before I ever ran a game. I played the Lord of the Rings role-playing game before I ever GM'd a true Dungeons and Dragons game. So for me, Lord of the Rings, when I'm drawing inspiration and I see what creativity, I think creativity ultimately treads a path based proportional to your ability to access inspirational source material. And the more awesome stories that we have as players, you're going to see people do it, like anime, for example. I think it started to explode this in my generation. So I could reference, and I'm a big Naruto guy, I could reference or be inspired by Naruto elements or One Piece elements or Bleach elements, because that's mine. Now I think I'm going to sound old to anime fans because like, oh, you 2005. I'm like, okay, man. All right, fine. Okay, don't call me that old. But that type of stuff. Whereas I think the reason why I think my thesis is this, I agree with you, by the way, John, permissioning and that give and take, but I think within that framework, they have so much more source material to draw from because they're constantly taking in media. And whereas we had a little bit more hybrid. I was kicked out of the house, be outside, walk nature trails as a kid, but I think that helped me forge a different style of creativity than these guys might have a little bit today. Just generally, obviously, there's myriad different ways of looking at it. So I think they're aggregating so much more context. And I think we had, especially with the internet and movies and streaming, than we had. I think you guys, it was like you had these major pillars, foundational pillars. You had Gygax and Star Wars, Indiana, like all of these things. And so that formed that foundation, then passed the baton to people like me, who's now trying to do the same for the Zers. Just very similar. I think, John, your point's really underrated, though, because it could be a potential danger. Because if you're like, all right, these are the rules, now where is the give and take? Whereas what you guys would do is like, how do I achieve my objective, right, within the constraints of the rules? I think you guys were more objective focused. These are like, all right, these are the framework, and then I can kind of make my objectives more fluid on the fly. So when I play games with people, I would say, I don't play a lot of games with teenagers, but like in their early to mid 20s, the goals were much more flexible because there's two types of things happening at once. The broader narrative of the entire party and the individual core stories. Like a lot of video games, for example, John worked at BioWare. My favorite trilogy ever is Mass Effect, right? Mass Effect is infamous for the larger story and the individual loyalty threads with other companions. I think kids now are more thinking about, well, what's my individual journey in the context of the party as well?
Yeah.
I don't think it was like that growing up, or at least not for me. I don't know if it was for you guys, but I think that dichotomy has started to really blossom in a big way.
Yeah.
That's my observation anyway.
Yeah. And it can be a challenge at the table, right? I remember for my library group, like it's what you just described, Ian. Each each of them had their own passions and plans and like coming up with reasons that the party's going to stick together for
exactly. You're doing a lot more weaving in real time, Harley, than you would have in your generation, where it's it's like we're gonna absolutely nuke the ziggurat right now. There's no question about it. Like, what are we doing here? We're gonna die if we don't. Whereas now, I feel like the GM has to be able to weave these things in real time. It's much harder, I think, to be a GM now than it may have been in a more scripted module system in the past, because everyone's here. So it's like, well, where is the nexus of our bond as a group? Mm-hmm. You need to like really plant that seed early. But I think that can be really fun too, because it can produce all these interesting moments of conflicts in a campaign.
Oh,
right? And you have to like justify that, right?
Yeah, and you don't ever want to like tamp down. Like, you know, I had a brother and sister that were like actively, you know, becoming gods opposed to one another, and it's like, oh my god. But I mean, you know, but that's why, you know, like John's tooltips are so useful. Like, if you can see the campaign, you know, and make sure that, you know, there's a nascent foundational reason we're all going to be working together, or at least have a shared goal, even if we're working to. Yeah, but it's fun, and it's a challenge, and it's so cool that we get to do this for.
I mean,
in the world,
it is the best. It is 100% the best game on earth. There's no question. I will 100% cape up for that. But I remember, I think to your last point here before we move on to DCC and Goodman backer kit stuff, is you said something really interesting there. So, for example, over COVID, you mentioned earlier, I did a 2-year campaign that really means a lot to me personally. I feel like talking about your campaign is going to be like, well, who's on your fantasy football team a little bit? Like, it's really meaningful to you, but not necessarily to everyone else. Although, to a certain extent, it's not true. Like, in my party, we had 2 purple ones, like Tiamat worshippers, like a literal cleric of Ilmater. It's like, how do you somebody who is in love with Drizzt, you know, it's like all of these things like, morally, you know, well, what's the, you know, what's going to be the problem that kind of binds these people together? I've always loved that challenge, because you want to do justice to people that are willing to role play at a high level.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? You really need to find a way to, like you were talking about earlier, Harley, like honoring the artist. Mm-hmm. A lot of GMs, if you're with people that are invested, that pay attention, that can role play, like you really need to put in some serious thought and effort and time to honoring that experience for them, so that they have these moments of awe, these apex moments, right? Mm-hmm. The moments where, you know, the goosebumps run down the arm, or that, like when you said at Gen Con, you roll the 20, you set all that up in the hopes that it'll take out, like, oh my gosh, there's really no better feelings. Like it's up there. It's on the pantheon of things, but not to like go too far down the rabbit hole. But anyway, Harley, I do want to honor, like, obviously you've had some really great work come out in your career, and some really great work come out recently. So I believe there is a set of third-party publishers, and you can keep me honest, that have collaborated on what I think is called Purple Planet, right? Yeah. Via BackerKit, and I think Goodman via DCC, and obviously yourself, but numerous other authors and illustrators have collaborated on this epic, truly epic backer kit, which it was in the very tens of thousands, right? Really like by crushed goals. I'd love to hear more about where you're at with that, how it was collaborating with, you know, because sometimes we talk about too many chefs in the kitchen. Like, what was that? Was that really fulfilling? Were there challenges? I'd love to hear, you know, you expand more on that. Really cool stuff.
Yeah. So, so just recently, Goodman Games ran a backer kit, you know, crowdfunding campaign to republish what had previously been a box set, Peril on the Purple Planet. And so we were going to, you know, rebind that as a hardcover. You know, there's some new content in there, you know, adventure I had written, a bunch of other stuff that we had added to that. Now, so in addition to that backer kit campaign, we also got with 6 other publishers who were all going to run simultaneous Purple Planet, simultaneous backer kit campaigns for materials set on the Purple Planet. And so it was the Purple Planet Horde is how we envisioned it. And so we had all these other third-party publishers contributing. You know, they all had their own stretch goals, their own, you know, some were writing adventure modules, some were writing online tools. Their stretch goals were, you know, Purple Planet character sheets and that sort of thing. But it was a really fascinating experience to get with, you know, creators who are all bringing their slightly different angle to the Purple Planet and contributing to the whole of the experience in different ways, you know, because like, okay, cool. Harley thinks he's a smart guy. He has this one vision of how he wants the Purple Planet to be, but it's not canon. And so to have to really round out that experience by having, you know, 6 other people that are just as passionate about what they find to be interesting in the end creates something like, now I can open the Purple Planet book, or wherever I keep that stuff on the bookshelf, and be like, oh wow, this is really exciting. I never thought of this. This is something really cool that somebody else created in this shared world. So yeah, it was a great campaign right now. So we've sent all the files off to the printer. Doug and I are working on a visual gazetteer, like literally right now. I meet with him tomorrow morning. That is going to be just thick with Doug's illustrations, and it's called The Seventh Doom Quest of Delisle Croom. And so Delisle Croom, this sorcerer, is going through his Doom Quest and illustrating it at the same time. So you're going to, players and judges and GMs are be able to, read about his Doom Quest while seeing, his illustrations about what he encountered on the Purple Planet.
Right.
And it's just been a really fulfilling experience to like both share the Purple Planet with, so many other creators, but also be able to like return to it myself and add to that body of material.
That I'm sure that was obviously very challenging, but ultimately very fulfilling, right? Because you're collaborating at a high level with other creatives, both in your field as a writer and storyteller and GM, but also artists, right?
Right.
And you know what just reminded me of this really great quote. Do you know who Sam Witwer is? He was the voice actor for Darth Maul in Clone Wars and Rebels.
Okay.
And he's the man. He's a like myself, a huge Star Wars nerd. And you were talking about the Purple Planet and kind of the threads of canon. And like in Star Wars, we talk about what's canon in Star Wars. It's like this whole nightmare. But he actually said George Lucas told him, you need to realize, and this is what triggered me with Purple Planet.
Yeah.
You need to realize every story you're watching and experiencing is a campfire tale. That's why it can't be completely contiguous and connected, because there's no such thing as campfire tales that run perfectly from one thing to another. So I think what you've done is this beautiful collection of like Purple Planet style-ish campfire tales.
Sure.
So it doesn't matter necessarily if it's like the canon. It matters that it's fun and engaging and beautiful and poignant, right? And I think it must have been so fulfilling to like at least know that subconsciously and like go into it with like the history that you have. And I just think that would have been a blast, just an absolute blast thinking about it on your behalf, right?
Yeah. No, it's great to be, like I said earlier, it's great to be surprised by your players, but it's also great to be surprised by creators, and really an honor that we all have a finite number of hours and days that we can put into these things we're passionate about. Anytime I'm going to run a game at a con, I'm like, this con, it ends in 4 days. That you're spending 4 hours with me is huge. Thank you for making this possible. And so for these creators, similarly to like, spend, their efforts, their finite days of their lives to contribute to this thing honor the players. You had said it earlier. We need to really, we honor the artists, we honor the players, and we just try to deliver an experience that's worthy of that sacrifice they're making by whether it's, writing for the Purple Planet or sitting down at our table for 4 hours. Like, it's all finite. So let's pour everything we have into it.
Awesome. And then this question's actually for both of you. And I always have to ask it. It's kind of a two-parter. Where are you creatively going next? Right. And I think, commercially, that's a fair question. I guess in your private games, you could say the same thing. And I know that obviously you and Jokin, John, are working on some really cool tooling that is meant to enhance people's state of play using, various AI ML tools, right, which we can talk about. But I'd love to hear from both of you. Maybe start with you, John, because I feel like I've been asking Harley a lot of questions selfishly. What are some of the things that you guys are working on and that you're passionate about and that you're really excited about that you'd love the community at large to know more about?
Well, I can think of two projects I'm working on right now, but they might not fulfill your criteria. The first one is, so I started Role-Playing Tips in 1999, and I have yet to do any kind of treatment about world building, which is foundational. So I just cracked that open. Can't put the cracked egg back together now. And so now I'm doing a lot of thinking about world building. And so, for example, like one of my hypotheses of why I have a world in a role-playing game as opposed to other mediums is that it creates puzzles. So if you know that the orcs and the elves hate each other and have ancient history of warfare, then as a player, you can take that and deduce other situations using that information.
Sure.
You could say, well, that's not true. An orc and an elf would never, do that together. You're lying, NPC, and that kind of thing. So I think you have world and a setting in part to create puzzles for the players to game through. And then, so I'm just exploring world building in general. And that's been, it's a big topic. So it's an ocean of detail. The other thing is I started up in January a GM coaching program. So this is real time.
Nice.
Cool. The idea is that we create legendary homebrew campaigns.
Yeah.
And so what's it going to take your average campaign and actually make it legendary? And so again, my hypothesis is that happens at the table, but there are things that you can do beforehand to create a greater probability of that happening, but also things that you can do at the table, like being a storytelling, like mastering story in the moment. I can get back to that in a second if you want. But anyways, so I'm doing a live group coaching program, and the amazing insights coming out of that is the invisible things that are barriers to game masters that I would never have found out without having these really deep, dedicated conversations and questions, and GMs saying I'm blocked in this regard. Really, really amazing experience in getting to the, I don't know what you want to call it, the roots of good GMing.
Can you offer a few examples of invisible roadblocks?
We talked about inspiration. So how do you find inspiration? And sometimes a person has a system for inspiration, and sometimes a person doesn't. But the idea of a system of inspiration itself came out of the program. So what do you do when you don't feel like it? But you've got a game. And so there are a variety of tools and techniques that I pulled out of my head. I didn't know I knew, and or the GMs in the coaching program also supplied. But it could be, for example, creating a page on Pinterest or something with your favorite images. Then you sit there for 1 minute, you stare at the screen, and then you begin your prep session fully. Your mind is now immersed in these details that you've curated. So that is a system. It's reproducible, and it generally has a consistent output, which is a good prep session for how often, however you prep. Another one actually is the different definitions around encounters. So some GMs consider them scenes, and some GMs just say, well, I just fluidly flow from one moment to the next. Whereas I'm more structured, like, okay, I have my 5-room dungeon structure. I have 5 rooms. Each of them has a story beat purpose, and I'm just going to narrate. Again, it doesn't have to be 5 rooms. It doesn't have, I'll take the gameplay and go with it. But anyways, different GMs have different notions of how a game session flows, whether it's stop, start, or one just long continuous experience. And so that's another example of just stuff I didn't know until I started talking to GMs and their notions of GMing.
I mean, my mind's going 1,000 different directions, but where it went right there is when we talk about structure, we talk about pace and immersion. Well, there's also the intersection of setting. Like, am I playing online? Because think about your 5-room dungeon. If I'm on Founder and I'm on Roll20, right? I might have already put it in there, right? Whereas we can maybe have a luxury of being more fluid in person. It's very interesting because then you have to take, it's like a 4D axis almost that you're talking about. And you're trying to find the best intersection point, but also what's best for the very unique combination of individuals at your table. So no GM's advice is going to work 100% of the time because they have might profoundly different tables. Like if I have a wargaming table, that's their route. I assure you that's going to be different than a lot of the folks who I play with just generally, which is role-playing heavy, and then we get to the combat and we streamline as much as we can with some of the VTT tools that are out there, which are really, really cool, by the way. But so you're sitting there that way. The reason why that advice I think is so valuable is because you can customize it per GM's context.
Right. Yes.
And then you can help deliver that for them rather than, and you're not saying, oh, there's a one size fits all. There's no panacea to any of these things. It's more like, here's how you find out the situation you're in, ground you to that, and then enhance your ability to move it forward. Really cool, John. Really cool.
Yeah.
Really cool.
Yeah. So I've got an example is I've got a technique called treasure table. And so it's a methodology. You go step by step to profile your players and to profile your characters.
Yeah.
And then you turn it into a bingo card of ideas that you can improvise with. And it's relative. It's related to the players, so it's highly relevant, but it's also related to the characters. They have a combat build they have a skill build, and then they have story hooks like quests and missions and purposes and goals. And so all of it, you just say B76, great, we're going to the dungeon today.
That's so funny.
So that is universal, but the contents of the table, of course, is what you just said. It's unique to the player makeup, the group makeup, the GM style, and stuff like that. Yeah, for sure.
That's so
very cool. John, you're the man. I love that. What about you, Harley? What's going on in your world? Where's Harley going next?
I'm just like I think my brain has been wiped by John. Like
no, but it's. I mean, there's a rabbit hole there. Like we have like that's like at least a 30-minute conversation that I desperately want to have, but can't for the sake of whatever real estate of time that we do have together. Maybe in another episode, John. Maybe we dedicate it like a real piece to exist, because I think what you basically just implied. I've given a skeleton. Here's how to form it. Here's where the bones go. Here's how they connect. Here's what they do. But everything built on top of that is bespoke.
Yep.
Which is really interesting, because that's the type of thing that can potentially work with GMs because of the uniqueness that you need to be able to play with, the story, the setting, the system. You could be playing GURPS, which could be potentially a very different application than 5e, right? Things like that. Oh man. Yeah, definitely. That could be dangerous, rabbit holing down there, but very fun for nerds like ourselves.
Yeah. We got time. Yeah. So right now, it's like I said, I'm finishing up 7th Doom Quest. And then, which has just been really neat to work with Doug, just hand in hand, to be able to have the opportunity to have an artist you admire and whose work you love, meet with him weekly and really, collaborate on, so it's not my manuscript I'm handing off to him and he's illustrating. It's us, working together to generate this story. And then after that, it's going to sound mundane, but I hope I can convey how excited I am. So we're building up to Gen Con. This year I'm running, those familiar with DCC RPG, there's this thing called a spell duel where wizards face off with one another. One casts magic missile, the other casts shield, the dice off. Oh, the shield causes the magic missile to rebound. The first wizard's probably, toast, whatever. Anyway, so, I'm going to be running a game, which is going to be a 6-way spell duel. And my hope is that we have 1,000 players out. It won't be 1,000 players, but a line of players out the door. So as each wizard dies, they're replaced by a new player and a new wizard. And so we have this this king of the mountain that's going to run for 4 hours, 8 times over the course of the con, culminate in this final tournament, this final spell duel between these masters of the arcane. So I'm running, this spell duel tournament for Gen Con, which I'm really excited about and just can't wait to.
Sounds like pure magic to me.
It's going to be so much fun, right? It's just going to be like, you sit down, you have your character sheet, you have your spell book, you're facing it off across it. That's where it gets real, right? Because it's not.
Oh yeah.
Harley's describing the orc. It's like, no, this guy's a jerk. He just cast enlarge on himself and he's trying to stop me. And then, oh man, but I managed to kill him. But then John comes in and sits down right there. And I lost magic missile. Okay, what do I have to defeat John? And John kills me. But then Ian sits down and Ian's going to. It's like, and we're going to be doing that 6 ways at the same time, and I can't wait for it. It's going to be so much fun.
You got to say which spell wins in the end. You got to circle back and be like, this is the King of the Mountain spell for all you 5 years, like, or whatever, sister. You got to come back and say, actually, it was Tasha's hideous laughter. Like, what, really? I laughed to death, and that's what I don't know, something like that. You got to circle back, Harley.
We ran it. I did the same thing like 10 years ago, and the King of the Hill there's this one spell at DCC which causes you like innervation or something. You lose 1 point of stamina. It's totally useless in this context, completely pointless. But it was a young girl. She was facing off against this other guy. He had caused himself to enlarge, to 100 feet tall. He's got a bajillion hit dice, but he had burnt down his stamina until he only had 3 stamina left.
Oh my gosh!
She cast, the innervating ray or whatever, and it just cost him 1 point of stamina. He's now down to 2. The giant falls over, comes crashing down to the ground.
A real David and Goliath story.
Yeah, it was awesome. And does she make the dex check in time to make sure this giant doesn't fall on top of her and kill her? In the act of him dying. But yeah, it was so. It's opportunity for player creativity. And just, I can't wait to see how it unfolds at Gen Con.
That's super cool. I love. When is Gen Con this year? Is it usually the same time every year?
Oh yeah. It's like that last weekend in July, first weekend in August. Yeah.
Nice. And so that you've been a regular attendee for a long time now, haven't you?
I've been really fortunate. Ever since I published that first adventure for Goodman back in 2004, if Gen Con's been open, I've had the opportunity to go there, run games, and help out at the booth. But mostly just be there to see people and to hear about all these cool stuff.
I mean, the community, right? I mean, there's so much passion. I feel like as a community, obviously there's toxic folks in every community, but I think by and large, the positivity, the passion, and the understanding that what we're doing is special. And it may only be special in certain ways to us and the people around us, but that in and of itself is special, especially in this day and age where there can be a lot of negativity, right? There can be a lot of challenges. And I feel like carving out this space, because remember just to bring it back to your generation, like classic 80 movies, nerds are getting beat up in the hallway by the jocks. This was a refuge initially.
Oh, completely.
If you read some of the books of how the history of D&D books, they'll be like, a lot of this was initially a refuge for those initial authors and illustrators. And then now we're becoming the cool kids.
Yeah.
Well, so now, if you look at like a lot of these actual play streams, you have all these people that weren't necessarily just like theater nerds or, people that were on like the improv stage, just regular ass people. Sorry to swear. I'll beat that out later. But like, that is where we need to go. I think it's so cool that you kind of get to be there and be a face of where we were, but now where we are in such a really cool way, Harley. That must be very gratifying to see that evolution.
To see,
oh my gosh,
to see women at the table, to see kids at the table. I mean, and to see somebody that doesn't look like me at the table is such a gift. And it's like, it took us a while. We have a long way to go, but thank God. And it's, it's, if you do at some point go to Gen Con, it's so palpable. You're at the top of the escalators. You're looking down. They haven't opened the main doors yet, and there's this sea of people. Some are in costumes, and it's just a sea of people that are passionately in love with games. And it's like, because like what you described, I was the kid sitting alone in the yearbook room during lunch hour because I couldn't summon the courage to go have a conversation with another human being. How crazy that those groups of people, they started to play a social game where they're going to talk to each other for 4 hours.
I know.
It's
such a beautiful irony though, because it's so disarming when you're, Smegalus the elf, right? And you're talking to them, a lot of the subconscious barriers that prevent social activity melt away.
It's amazing.
It's such another good example of why our art form's the GOAT. Like, just be honest. Like, let's just pat ourselves for just being a small part of this. In our
I was running a game for a friend who, and I looked around the table and I realized the friend's the dad. He's a lawyer, but there's 5 other kids at the table, and of them, like 6 had nice math. That's did you catch that, John? Of the 5 players, 6 had speech impediments, but it didn't matter in that moment. They're just it was like, wow, this really, it is. It's I think it still remains a refuge for people that, whatever reasons, they can still come there. And how wonderful that it's broadened the community, because it only brings more generative ideas, right? And and how biased and insulting of me to think that, oh well, you're handsome and you're charismatic, and so obviously you have nothing to contribute to this weird role playing game. Like, bullshit. This person is a human being with a wealth of experiences. Of course they should contribute to our game.
It's a human thing. Bring it back. It's full circle. Yeah. That's why I've always loved the expression, we all have a place at the table. Literally just about any human being has a place. Now, depending on who sits, you might want to customize the experience based on that. That's in any community setting. Would you want to do something similar anyway? But I think once it's bespoke and well crafted and well thought out for that group who's willing to participate, there's really very few things like it, like the bonding, the laughter, the epicness, right? And as the story grows and evolves, because as a species, that's very innate and subconscious, we get to be a part of that. I just think it's so tremendously powerful. So, we're at the hour. So I have 2 more questions because I know you guys have busy days to attend to. But I have two more questions. And I don't want to sound like I'm sucking up to Ed Greenwood here, who's, by the way, killing it on YouTube. Shout out to Ed. But I think settings like the Forgotten Realms are deeply underserved by the media, interactive media that we have out there. So I am very passionate about pushing. I just released a video on a video game set in the Forgotten Realms that really should exist, if we're being honest. But I'd love to hear your guys' perspective, because you have a ton of experience with a ton of different settings. What are your versions, and it can be the Forgotten Realms too. What are some settings that you've played that we as a community and, you know, businesses in a commercial sense should be doubling down, creating experiences for role players? What are some of those settings for you and why?
John, do you want to go first? I'm not sure I even have a good answer.
I think like I'm down on I like homebrew these days.
Yeah, well, that's true. That can be a setting. Like, you want to give birth to yours. Like a lot of budding writers, John, think about how gratifying it would be to have, if you're a writer, how lonely that is. We know how lonely it can be to be a GM, for like worlds and characters and sounds and music to be in your head and to just have it stick there. How gratifying it would be for you, John, as a writer, right? To have someone meet that at face value and live in your world. So it can just as easily be homebrew as your answer. And that's totally fair.
Yeah. I think the process is the reward of creating the setting, and the setting itself isn't. But for published settings, I mentioned Birthright, and that has a very unique take on kind of realm management. A lot different than the companion book and Test of the Warlords. Another one is Dark Sun, because that was mechanically it really, when I experienced it as a very young person, I realized, hey, the mechanics truly are my own to create and collaborate with on the players. So why not make a world where magic defoliates everything and causes a terrible. And there is another setting. I'm trying to think of the settings that are so.
You both talked about Cyberpunk in your respective interviews, which is crushing it. You know, when CD Projekt Red released Cyberpunk, it wasn't totally there, although actually it worked fine on my computer for what it's worth. But now it is very stable, very fluid, very engaging. Obviously, you can tell by my background, it's a vibe, right? Yeah. I think we're going to get more of that. My only gripe with those types of settings, and this is why I created like the somewhat antagonist that I did in my D&D story, is like, I think a lot of the stories that we have post-apocalyptic, where there's like this negative and we're fighting, like Fallout, which I love, by the way, it's a great show, great game, but we're constantly fighting against this, or like Cthulhu, like an unbeatable tide of negativity. So when we released our actual play, right, what I designed, you know, you guys are Star Trek guys, I don't care, throwing it out there, you know, the Kobayashi Maru, the test that Kirk goes through. Okay, so let's say, I'm throwing this out there, guys, humanity has achieved a golden age. You know, let's just say that, our first ever one, and you are at a high-end academy. What is a Kobayashi Maru in a real humanity? Like, what would that be like? So the actual play that we played is in some ways, when we figured it out, what are the challenges, the level and scale and type of challenges that we, you know, can achieve together. I like stories like that, because let's take it the opposite direction. Let's brute force and be cold-blooded positive people. You know, like let's go in the entirely opposite. So I gravitate towards settings where I have a chance to do that as a character. It might be hard. It might be really GD hard, but that's a chance. Whereas Cthulhu, like, I have some of my best friends, they love horror games and games where you're screwed. And it's just like, you know, how can you prolong your life? I'm like, I'm good. 100% expunging that evil. Let's go. So I like settings like that, guys, like where let's find a positive spin, which is why Forgotten Realms, as messed up as it is, there is a chance. Baldur's Gate 3, Game of the Year. It was hard, but there's a chance, right? Didn't solve everything, but it did kill an Elder Brain at the end, if you play the good guys anyway. Just saying, right? Like things like that. Throwing it out there.
What you're describing, that's why I couldn't play, you know, when they built Ravenloft out of just an adventure module into, you know, an entire setting, there's no chance of winning. Like it's this realm is going to be horrible, you know, no matter what you do. And I couldn't sell that to the player, and I didn't want to. Like, what's the joy in that? You know, it's just. But I think, you know, even for Dark Sun, for John, you know, there's a hope that we can turn around this environmental, waste, where every spell, drains more life out of the world. Well, we can figure out a way to counter that. But to your first point, your first question, Ian, you asked us what's an underserved setting, and I'm gonna cheat out too, like John. I think I want to know, that kid I ran for, 6 years ago during COVID, like what's in his brain? Like the underserved settings the best adventures have not been written yet. The best settings have not been written yet. Where's little Eddie Greenwood, in some library in Canada, like, what's he coming up with right now? He's taped together 15 8.5 by 11 sheets, and he's drawing his little world, and like those are the underserved settings I want to see attention. If every and we said this off air, but what something Goodman has done right is just made and has done a lot of things right, but just made the third-party license so accessible. Anyone who can create a PDF can write a Dungeon Crawl Classic or something for Ants Crawl, and the game is so much richer, for those offerings. I remember, and John, well, I'll shut up after this, I promise. But remember, like we could walk into TSR as kids, right? Not TSR, Toys R Us, sorry. And there was that wall of TSR offerings, and it just seemed like it was infinite, right? Because you're in 4th grade and it's like twice as tall as you are, and you're like, there's no end to these modules. And it turns out there was. And oh my God, like there were all these modules, and they're catalogable, and like there's an end to that. But then if you open it, and so Goodman Games is the same way. There's only so much that Harley's going to write or Doug's going to illustrate. But if you open that up to the masses, that they can create something for Dungeon Crawl Classics or Purple Planet or what have you, all of a sudden that world takes on a whole new life. That game takes on a whole new life, because now there's so many third-party offerings. I haven't read half of them. I have no idea what's going to come up next, and it's so cool to know that it's the game is infinite because everyone's contributing to it.
Well, given I run an organization called Store Together, I think it's reasonable for me to say I couldn't agree with you more, for what it's worth. I think neutering people's creativity is antithetical to this art form, I think, in a lot of ways, right? We need to find business commercial practices where there's profit on both sides, right? And you actually want to incentivize high-end creative talent to join. You don't want them to just go write in a writer's room in Hollywood.
Right.
You want to bring them in, incentivize them, enrich our story worlds, right? That, I think there's a way to craft that. I've worked in the Fortune 500 for my whole career. I just think that there are ways that are underserved that I think are underestimated. I'm not calling out any particular organization that I would like to have positive relationships with moving forward. But in general, I actually agree. And then I think it should be more financially lucrative for them in any event. But again, we've been talking a lot. I have one last question for you guys. I know you have to go. And this is always the question that I ask, John, how about this? Because, I'll ask you first again, because maybe you have a little bit of a different spin. If you could have one dream or desire come true for you in tabletop now or moving forward, right? What would that one dream be? It doesn't have to be like this grandiose thing. It could be small, like the Calvin and Hobbes. I always raise this where in Calvin and Hobbes, Calvin's like, well, what would you wish for? And Hobbes goes, a sandwich. And then at the end panel is him munching on a sandwich and Calvin not getting his ridiculously highfalutin wish, right? So it can be that too for you, right? What is that thing for you in tabletop as you move forward? We know where you're going directionally, but what's that one dream or passion or wish that you could make come true for yourself and your community in tabletop?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm never good at the absolute type of answers. What's your favorite book? Or, but what I would really like is a directory of tools and techniques, GMing tools and techniques. Like earlier, we talked about inspiration. So whenever a new intellectual property or a new movie comes out, you have a whole bunch of activity in the online RPG community of people wanting to emulate that. Hey, I want a game of, I want a Fallout RPG game, and then a new thing comes out. So you're right. The industry can inspire and perpetuate the game. But I still, what I get most out of the hobby is the creator side and the GMing side. Like you're dealt a hand of cards at random that you don't know in advance, and you have to play those cards in the moment to the best of your ability to create awesome. So that involves a bunch of tools and skills, everything from public speaking to creativity, strategy, math. And I just think a catalog of all the GMing techniques, involving the Great GM and Alexandrian and Angry GM and others would be amazing. And just see, oh, great, I will take from the menu this, and now I'll try it out and forge my
Love
jamming
that.
style by all of these ideas and things that have been created in advance or ahead of time or before me.
I will buy that book. Yeah, like make that.
I think a lot of us would buy that book, brother. Just saying.
Make that tome. I think for myself, Ian, and I think it's probably already happening, but I want it it's a little bit of Hobbs's tuna fish sandwich and still a little bit of Calvin's, time making machine. Like the more that we can, continue to normalize role playing games as an activity that everybody can do, and I'm sure you talk about this, but everybody has, right? Like you look out on the playground and there's kids playing role playing games, and then it's cops and robbers, right? And they're chasing them. Like every child lives in that imaginative world.
That's right.
And it's us as adults that have been told, well, that's a game for kids. And thankfully, some of us didn't listen to that. But the more that we can normalize role playing games as a fulfilling activity for people of all ages, I think the more people are doing it, the more people contribute to it, the better our world is. So, yeah.
Agreed. Yeah, we're not an audience in a role-playing game. We're participants.
Yes.
So we're creators.
Yes. Thank you. Right. Like
But we're not just sitting back.
right.
And
You're
consuming
gonna sit there. You're gonna be passive. And you're gonna have this thing projected into your brain. No, to be able to take an active role, like and like I said, you look on the playground and every third grader, every second grader is doing just that.
Yeah.
And then we tamp it out of them at some point. So
Yeah, agreed. And I've heard stories anecdotally from a few GMs who run conventions and or games with in different contexts. And after a session of RPGs, they feel they have more agency in life. Sometimes
cool.
The players go away from the table saying, well, I had total control. This is what it feels like to come up with ideas and to see them come about and to confront conflicts and whatever it is. And so then they take that away because the brain, like you said, can't differentiate between what it's envisioned quite clearly and what's actually experienced. So yeah, that's amazing. More people playing role-playing games would make for a better world, in my opinion, too.
I love it.
Well, again, story together, right? Couldn't agree with you guys more. It is just it's deeply pleasurable to hear you guys and your passion and your experience share such a similar philosophy. I mean, it's very the bow that I'll tie on that before we wrap up is Coach Jimmy Valvano, legendary run for NC State in the college basketball tournament. He said, if you want to have, he was a bit of a philosopher himself, if you want to have a great day, a full day, a very human day, you need to do three things. You need to be in thought, you need to spend time thinking, you need to laugh, and you need to cry. If you do all three of those things in a day, you've had a hell of a day. And you can do that in 5 minutes in a tabletop story. So you know what I mean? You can do that all within 5 minutes. So, I think it's, to your guys' point, it's such a unique activity. I think we're just exploring where it's ultimately going to go. And it's gratifying to have wonderful men like you in the community representing us in such a positive way. I obviously wish you both nothing but the best in your endeavors. You have some wonderful stuff going on. Just want to say, for my part, it was really pleasurable to sit here and talk with you guys today. It was really awesome. Really appreciate your guys' time in this random Saturday afternoon here.
Yeah. Thank you so much for making it possible.
Oh, of course. Well, all right. Have a great day, guys. Talk to you soon. All right.
See you guys. Thank you, John.